be the first kind of pass at the integration we have with this shot. So with time, your eye will get trained a little bit better in terms of spotting color differences and very subtle color differences. So if this is like, if you're not seeing color differences and they're kind of close, just know that the more you do this, the easier it gets. So what we're looking at just with this plate, before we continue on with the D-spill problems, I just want to bring these a little bit closer together to start to get sort of a shot looking correct. So one of the main differences we're seeing is this really bright area next to his face compared to the values of the wall that's in our footage. So you can see it's a much greener value versus this more like sort of tan and neutral. I mean, this is a little bit more neutral up here, but this is more like tan and orange. So we see there's kind of a two-tone thing going on here, and maybe even very slightly kind of gray over here, maybe even slightly more red in this piece of the wall. So we see if we compare even our RGB values, if we want to compare it that way, if you hit, for example, green, if you look at the green channel, you see this is much brighter than these areas over here. And if we look at blue, also it's much brighter. So that we know this is more kind of teal green than this area. So that's one way to check it. Also, if you're just struggling to see the color differences. Another way to check it if you aren't completely sure is to do what's called a saturation test. So you can put a saturation node and we can plug it in. And basically, I don't recommend doing this all the time because it kind of, I would say it's almost like a temporary color blindness if you do this too much. But basically what you do is you crank up the saturation and then you look at the color differences. So we can see you can see the differences very obviously now that this is way too green compared to the rest of the composite. The problem is now if you disable this, your eyes are less sensitive to the color differences because you've just exposed your eyes to something really vibrant. So it's harder to see the differences after you do the little saturation trick there. But if you just want to check your work, you can do that, check it, and then, close your eyes for, 30 seconds or a minute, or walk away from the screen and come back so your eyes are kind of refreshed. So that's just one way to check it out there. So first thing I'm going to do is go for that problem, and I'll just put a grade node. Let me move this grade node down. This is our blacks adjust. So I'm just going to move this closer. This whole thing actually is just move it down so it's not so far. I'll leave the black point thing here, but I'll do a grade beforehand, and I'll put a roto shape in there. And then I'll just kind of start rotoing this area here. Make sure I turn off my clip format. And we could start to, let's just say, push it towards the tan colors. So that's going to see, basically you see the green and the blue are getting reduced as we pull towards the orange. So I can pull it a little bit towards and then I'm just going to kind of, I don't want this to be completely monotone either, so I'm going to keep, because we see that this is a little bit orange and then it kind of goes slightly less orange, so I'm going to kind of fade it. So I'm going to hit control and kind of feather this this alpha, just so that we get not a completely monochromatic image, as it'll just leave it a little bit more interesting and believable. So that might be a little bit too orange, so let's just play around with the color a little bit. So I'm just looking at here and I'm looking at here. So I'm kind of comparing, getting a similar tone. Doesn't need to be exact, but just needs to feel like they belong together. And we might need to go in there and rotoscope areas a little bit differently to specifically, but even that helps quite a lot in terms of our integration. Just that very subtle change. We could also go here and maybe start to take some of the green out of this and make it maybe sort of like this tone here. So I'll do another grade and a roto shape. And I'll just go here and select this area, feather it a bit, or feather it a lot rather. And maybe we'll just pull it towards the magentas very slightly. And you can see that's, it'll get a little bit closer. Let's just see, we can increase the red just very slightly. I'm kind of looking at this area. This is still a little bit too saturated, what we're doing here. And maybe this still has too much green. So I can go back and just I'm going to use my arrow keys and just kind of select the number there and press the down arrow. And that's another way to like really get in and specifically adjust colors. And we could, maybe that's a little bit slightly too magenta, so we could just pull it back a little bit. So something like that. So if we disable and we enable, we see that that starts to bring the image together a little bit. And these are all small adjustments, but they do add up. So I might even select this pole and make it slightly warmer. We see that these tones are a little bit warmer in the highlights of this wall, like even this kind of plaster. And of course, it's not everything is always going to match each other depending on the material and everything like that. But I think for this image, it'll probably benefit. So I'm just going to crank up the feather in here and then add a little bit more of that tan into that pole there. So we see the difference. Yeah, so that's looking kind of interesting. I do find this little black line, even if it's in the image, I think it is actually in the picture, the original picture. If we look at the original here, we do have a black line there, and after it's defocused, you know, that becomes more apparent. It does look like a mistake though. So here's one thing as a color, or rather a plate integration technique. Even if things are actually supposed to be there, if you have conflicting lines or things that, let's say as the final 2D image gives sort of a bad impression, like it looks like a mistake, even though it isn't. Sometimes I'll go and fix those things anyways. So that's something we could definitely go back and fix. So I could go back there and go before the defocus and just put a grade, and then we'll just go in there and kind of lift that black line a little bit so it doesn't look like there's some kind of mistake. So I can go there, take the lift, and just sort of push it up just a little bit and just blur that so that it's not a sharp alpha. You can use the feather as well. And then maybe we'll take a little bit of the blue out of the lift so it's kind of in the tones of the other areas around it. So you see it kind of just gets rid of and softens that black line there. And if we look at the difference, we see less of a distracting black line coming off here. And we'll fix the black line on the despill problems and everything like that. But that's just an integration trick there. I think our blacks could be slightly lifted as well. We might need to desaturate some of these areas. They're kind of all over the place in terms of the values. So we have these weird greens and stuff. So I would probably go in there. If we look at the black point I think is doing is fine, but just some of the weird color values in there doesn't really make sense. So we're just going to go into the saturation node and just knock everything down, because we have some reds and greens. I'm not sure how this image is processed. It's off a royalty-free stock image site, but there's all kinds of weird stuff going on in there. So we'll just try to take some of those values out. So I'll just put a rotoshape and then take the saturation and bring it down. So if we take a look, you see that if I brighten it quite a lot, we can see all the red and green, like these weird differences. And make sure your rotoshape has the clip off to no clip. Otherwise, because I didn't set the project correctly, learn from my mistake. You know, rather than I don't want to, basically if I change the project settings to the correct format right now, all these rotos will kind of break and I have to go reformat them. So that's why I'm not doing it. But if you started the project from scratch, you can definitely do that. And okay, so if we gamma up here, that's definitely not matching. That's going too blue because we're kind of desaturating it. So it's kind of pushing all the colors together, which sometimes is useful and sometimes it's not. So sometimes I'll desaturate and then we'll just kind of tint it with another grade node. So I'll plug in the grade, the same roto shape, and then we can put like more of these tan tones in there. We could actually use a gamma. I don't like using gamma in this scenario because you kind of might add contrast, which I don't really want to do. So if you just want to sort of add color without adding contrast, I'm going to use the multiply instead. So something like that. And if we compare, there's what it was before, and we're really gained up here, by the way. So if we go back to normal, it's a very subtle difference that we're getting, but it's just sort of neutralizing that area a little bit. And what we could do is if we want to bring back some of the neutral highlights, so it's not all one color, we could key some of those little highlights in there just to keep some of these different tones. Again, we never want to push things completely monochromatic, but that area needs a strong grade to fix it. So that's what I'm doing. So we'll just do a keyer node. And if we look at these little, I don't know, metal beams that are catching some bokeh highlights, I'm just going to kind of isolate those in an alpha. And then I'm going to put a roto shape and mask those little shapes. So I'm going to set the roto shape to a mask and set the roto shape to no clip. And then I'm just going to go in there and kind of select some of those shapes there. So we get an alpha like this. We can blur the alpha out so we don't get a harsh edge, and then we can use that as a grade mask. And then I'll just ping up those highlights just a little. Just make sure I'm doing the right thing here. We might need to adjust that alpha because the alpha is not, if you look at the values, 0.13. So when we try to plug it into the grade, it's not doing much because it's looking for pure white. So essentially, you just need to strengthen this alpha by adjusting the key. Like that. So now we can adjust that area independently and maybe put some opposite of tan, so we'll put a little bit of blue. So it just brings a secondary color in there. You see how everything is pure tan and all yellow, and then we just put a little bit of blue in there, just so not everything is exactly the same material, the same color. So we can do that here as well. We could go here and maybe just introduce some different tones. Maybe there's some different pipes or whatever up there, and it kind of feels like it's going with this light. Now I notice there's a little sharp edge that I've accidentally created here, so I think that's one of my alphas. So you got to be careful with your roto shapes. You always want to blur them or feather them. Usually I'll just put a blur after or just feather inside the settings. And okay, so I think that's good. Maybe we're drawing a little bit too much attention to it with the brightness, so I might just, with this shape here, I might just kind of maybe feather it off a little bit. And we might darken just behind, because we have this, that's one thing to look out for. So as part of this plate integration learning, your eye will always be drawn to points that have lots of contrast. So if something really bright is behind something really dark, that's why this is kind of not looking very cool, because you have this very bright and then you have this weird dark edge and then you have this like weird thing. Same thing is happening here. You have this very bright thing behind this dark chandelier rope or whatever this is supposed to be. So I always look out for those things. Your edges are what sell a composite. Edges are everything. So that's something I want to teach you guys in this class is pay attention to those areas. And not always, sometimes you actually intentionally want to draw the viewer in terms of areas of contrast like this. But in an area like this is totally unrelated to the story. That's not where we want to be looking, is up in some random area in the ceiling. So we would want to darken that a little bit. And we can blur it a little bit as well. And maybe we'll darken it even just a little bit further. So it's really just not somewhere you're going to look. So these are all small details, but usually it's how I'm thinking, and I think it's kind of useful to learn about. So you see the difference there. This is like, if you're looking at this picture as a whole, this is kind of, if you're just looking around, like scan with your eyes and try to see if anything stands out, that kind of stands out to me. So if I go like that, it doesn't stand out after you do a little bit of adjustment to it. And if it doesn't stand out to you right away, it's probably just an experience thing. So again, the more you practice, the more things will sort of become obvious to you. So I'm going to do the same thing to this little area, and maybe just I'm going to create a shape and sort of feather it just to kind of fade off that top area a little bit. So maybe not that much, but we could, just to not have it so obvious. And of course, the thing that I taught you guys before, we already did a 2D track for this shot, so we can go back, find that match move we did, and we'll just paste it. I'm on the same frame that I created the reference frame on, so I can just basically paste this track, and I know that all these rotors are going to stick. So if we put the rotors on all those, they should all basically stick. Let me just make sure that this guy, the clip format, make sure it's no clip. Make sure that all these are set the same way. Otherwise, we're going to get some strange issues. And yeah, so that's good. And so that's a good starting point. If I disable everything, you can see there's a pretty significant difference in terms of the way you perceive this image. So all those little changes you see add up. And that's really what compositing is about, is developing an attention to detail and thinking about these things. So I'm also just going to try something real quick here and place a transform. I just want to see if maybe the perspective might be too high. It could be. So I'm just going to close all this stuff, because we see the floor here, but this wall is actually going in this direction. So the floor actually might need to be slightly lower. So it might be that it needs to be like that. So maybe our wall is just slightly too high. So if I disable the crop, it might be that our image is supposed to be more like this. And you notice I'm putting all of my nodes that are the same type in, let me just put that there, in a group, because they're concatenating, meaning we're not damaging the image by, usually you want to put all your transformations together. That's really just how you want to think of it. All the purple nodes, they go together. All the blue ones, they go together. But in this case, I just did a bunch of color corrections, and then I realized, hey, maybe my perspective is slightly off. So I put a transform here. It's not following the rule perfectly, but in terms of the overall damage to the image, it's probably minimal, because I'm only doing it once. But just something to keep in mind is you'll want to keep these nodes together if you can. So we could just play around with the positionment. I think that seems pretty good. So just making a slight shift so it's less high here. And another area that's really disturbing, not disturbing, but not appealing. Obviously, we have this nasty D-spill edge that we're going to take care of on this rope. But again, we have a really bright thing in the background there. So I'm just going to go there and darken that thing as well, because that's not a point of storytelling. So we can just go in there with a rotoshape, really roughly feather it out like crazy, and then just darken it, because we don't really want to focus on that thing. And then we'll put the track on there so it'll stick. And we might want to add a little bit of orange as well to it. It's looking a little bit neutral, so we can just add a little bit of color. And yep, that's pretty much it for that part. Might be slightly too dark. Again, it's always a little, it's very back and forth. Sometimes you need to make little tweaks over and over just to and keep comparing it to other things around. So that's how I'm kind of sort of thinking about it while I'm doing this. Cool. So that looks pretty good as a good starting point. We might need to go back and tweak it. We'll see how I feel, or you feel, based on this. I'm just looking at this back wall here to see maybe it needs very slightly more orange. So it looks still a little bit more neutral than here, but just very slightly. So these are very slight differences, but just to show you guys my process, I think it's worth extending this video so you guys can see how I do my back and forth process. So I think that's a little bit closer. And this is a little bit too blue, this area. So if I look at the highlights of this, it's looking too neutral and blue compared to anything that we see anywhere else. There could be a light back there that's doing this, but I would just like to take out a little bit of blue and maybe a little bit darker. And maybe a little bit more warmth into it so we can slightly reduce the green, maybe increase the red a little bit. Could add a little bit of blue back. I'm basically trying to keep it sort of close to this color. So, yeah, sort of in that range there. But you see that we still have a sort of a gradient of color. So I didn't just grade this whole background the same. You know, I didn't just take it and just take a little bit of blue out of everything. I made this a little bit more tan, this a little bit more reddish, sort of similar to the wall here, just kind of opposite. And we can disable, enable just to check it. So yeah, I think that's good for now. We'll keep going on to the despill as we have plenty more work to do there. But I just wanted to show you guys a little bit of the color integration process, and we'll get onto, you know, matching grain and stuff like that as well, because right now our background doesn't have any grain, whereas our foreground has grain, and that's going to help it sit in a lot better. But we'll do that kind of in the second half of like integration versus doing that now. I would like to go back to doing the keying and despilling to get this guy sitting in better.